Sacramento Kings legend Peja Stojakovic had a lot to say about the De'Aaron Fox trade and Fox's agent Rich Paul on the NBA Out of Bounds podcast. And the timing of it all is a bit convenient. I'll share my thoughts on Peja's comments, plus the Trey Young trade talks are really heating up. We're discussing it all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And yes, we're still talking about the De'Aaron Fox trade. Hey, don't blame me. Don't say, Matt, move on, because this is recent news and recent comments from a Kings legend in Peja Stojakovic, who, of course, goes beyond just his time on the floor wearing number 16 in Sacramento. Of course, that number 16 hanging from the rafters inside of the Golden One Center. Peja, remember, worked as a member of the Kings front office for many years. He was one of the lead assistant general managers during the Vlade Divac regime. So he has, of course, close ties with Vlade, who we've seen kind of work his way back into the fold here in Sacramento. Not that he is the general manager. We know that's Scott Perry. But remember, Scott Perry used to also work for Vlade Divac for a very short period of time. Towards the end of last season, we saw Vlade Divac hanging around with Vivek Ranadive more. So we know Vlade's connected. We know Peja is connected. He still lives around this area, calls this area home. So this is somebody who is plugged in, right? And this is somebody who has ties and relationships with current Kings ownership and the current state of the Sacramento Kings. So Peja, speaking on the Fox trade, has more value than just a former player who appeared on a podcast who was asked about the biggest recent topic of conversation of the main team that or franchise that he's associated with, right? I think it goes beyond this. Peja appeared on the NBA Out of Bounds podcast and discussed many different things, but the main thing that we're going to talk about is he was asked about the De'Aaron Fox trade. And here were Peja's comments. Quote, "It seems there was a directive from his agent, Fox's agent, Rich Paul, who played a key role and blackmailed the teams on which player was supposed to get traded where. He brought Fox to the Spurs, and Zach LaVine, who is his player, because Zach LaVine is also is represented by Clutch Sports, is represented by Rich Paul, who is his player, brought him to Sacramento. By doing this, he limited Sacramento from a business standpoint, stating that they get a bit more from this trade with Fox if they had the same discussion with some other teams in the NBA. So to paraphrase, what Peja is saying here is that Rich Paul orchestrated everything. Rich Paul made sure Fox went where they wanted Fox to go, San Antonio. True. Rich Paul made sure his client, Zach LaVine, got to Sacramento. Kind of partially true. And Rich Paul basically leveraged everything to force the Kings into accepting a Zach LaVine trade because that was the best that they were going to get, and they weren't going to be able to get anything better than Zach LaVine and his bad contract anywhere else. Okay, so let's break this down. First and foremost, I put this out on social media. I'm not at all surprised by a majority of Kings fans' reaction. See, we know this, and the media was blaming Vivek and was defending Fox. He's a snake. Rich Paul was the problem. They destroyed this Kings organization. I understand if you are a Kings fan that is desperate to have the Fox situation and that trade not be the fault of your team, right? To save any sort of face. I understand that loyalty to the team and the organization and Kings on the front and not wanting that to look bad. And I have had the same feelings that you have had before about national narratives or narratives outside of Sacramento that were twisted and turned to negatively reflect the Kings when it wasn't completely fair or not the full story was told. I've talked about many of those stories over the years here on Locked On Kings, so I get you. I understand you. I'm not mocking you in any sort of way. Understand this, though. Rich Paul did his job. It sucks. Rich Paul did his job, got his client in De'Aaron Fox to the best place for him and for Clutch Sports, because those are his primary motivations. And he used the leverage that the Sacramento Kings gave him to do it. If you want to make Rich Paul your bad guy, you can. If you want to make De'Aaron Fox your bad guy, you can. Many people already have. But understand that they played the cards that the Kings handed them. My point in this whole thing has always been that the Kings wear a heavy amount of the blame. And considering I cover the Sacramento Kings, I am emotionally invested into the Sacramento Kings, and they're going to be the ones that I continue with, and I can wave bye-bye to Fox and wave bye-bye to Rich Paul because they're no longer a part of the Sacramento. Well, Rich Paul is with both Doug Christie and Zach LaVine, but you get my meaning. Like, the Fox trade is over and done with. He's moved on. I'm still paying attention to what he's going to do in San Antonio, but he's no longer a part of the Kings. The Kings now are still dealing with the repercussions of that Fox trade. So that's what I'm going to hyper-focus on, and this is a position that the Kings put themselves in. The Kings knew where Fox stood on a number of different issues, from the Mike Brown situation, to which when they fired Mike Brown, they essentially knew they were saying bye-bye to De'Aaron Fox, and I think they knew that wholeheartedly when they made that move. On top of that, De'Aaron Fox had been asking for years about certain help in certain areas on the roster that the Kings did not properly address. So, and again, I'm not saying that De'Aaron Fox is perfect and the Kings should bow to every whim of De'Aaron, because Fox didn't always hold up his end of the bargain on the floor. I acknowledge that and I'm aware of that. But we're talking about Rich Paul leveraging the situation that the Kings put themselves in because of how they handled or mishandled the requests and desires and sometimes demands of the star player in question. Zach LaVine has been in the eye of Vivek Ranadive and Kings ownership for a very long time. So I do not buy for a single second that Zach LaVine was forced upon the Sacramento Kings. I do not believe that at all. Vivek has loved LaVine, the offensive player that LaVine is, the explosiveness of LaVine above the rim, his ability in transition, his appeal, his draw. Vivek has been enamored with LaVine, just like a lot of people around the NBA have been enamored with LaVine and his offensive ability for years. So I do not buy at all that the only reason Zach LaVine came to Sacramento and the Kings acquired LaVine in his bad contract was because Rich Paul forced LaVine upon them, blackmailed everybody else to make sure Zach LaVine was literally the only thing that they could get of any remote value in return for Fox. I do not believe that for one single second. And if that was a narrative coming out of the Sacramento Kings, not just Peja, but coming out of the Kings organization, if I were to hear anybody in the Kings organization even remotely suggest that, I would call that out on the spot because it's absurd. It's just not true. It's not true. The Kings allowed a lame duck general manager in Monte McNair, who knew his job was gone. It was toast. The way that season was going, it was gone. I think that's been made abundantly clear by how quickly the Kings hired Scott Perry after everything was said and done when they fired Monte McNair before the players were walking off the freaking floor. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. After the Kings got destroyed in the play-in game, Monte McNair was fired very, very quickly after that. He was a lame duck GM, and they allowed him to make the massive decision of trading De'Aaron Fox that has significant future implications on this franchise and the new front office that would come in to run it. Why would they do that? Because it wasn't really Monte McNair making the decision. It was ownership making the decision and getting a player that ownership has wanted for years. Connect the dots, people. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is just common sense. And you have a lot of people inside, outside, around the organization that are drawing these conclusions and are telling you the same thing. So don't pretend that Zach LaVine being a Sacramento King and the Kings trading Fox for LaVine, which everybody realizes is a mistake. Don't pretend that it was Rich Paul who did that and not the Sacramento Kings. The Kings ultimately still had the final say. The Kings could have said no. The Kings should have done what I was saying, and many people were saying they should have done the entire time. The season is essentially lost. Even if you make the playoffs, you're not going anywhere. If Fox wants to have surgery and shut it all down and pout, fine. Ride it out for the rest of the year. Bring in your new front office. Let them handle the De'Aaron Fox trade with time on their side and the offseason with context of how the playoffs go for other teams, like the Houston Rockets, for example, who may not have felt at the time that they needed to give up a lot for De'Aaron Fox. Then they got bounced in the playoffs because their point guard in Van Vliet wasn't very good, and now suddenly they might want De'Aaron Fox more. Or the San Antonio Spurs, who get the second pick in the draft. Maybe now they're willing to move on from Stephon Castle. There's all this context that you could have gotten just by being patient, but instead you went for a short-sighted, we have to make the playoffs for ticket sales and for our pride's sake. You made all your decisions based off of that objective, and Rich Paul leveraged that in order to get this trade done. The Kings made the mistake. The Kings made the mistake. Rich Paul, as cruel as it may feel, did his job. So I get what Peja is saying, but it's fallen on deaf ears here. And I also think the timing of this is a wee bit convenient. I'll explain in just a second. This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Wayfair. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you are wanting to upgrade your patio and backyard area this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for the summertime. Wayfair has everything that you need to level up your outdoor space, including conversion sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set that vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without any resort price tag. If you're looking for an outdoor dining set, for example, right? You want a place where you and the family can go outside when it cools down a little bit to have a nice dinner. Or maybe you're having a lot of people over for a barbecue. Want to make sure there's enough places for people to sit and eat comfortably. Wayfair's got that for you. Plus modern lounge chairs. I'm a fire pit man, right? Whether it's cooking s'mores or just chilling out by the fire, I'm down to do it in my backyard instead of driving up to the mountains to do it in a campsite and sleeping on the floor in a tent. Just bring it to me in my backyard. You can find that all with Wayfair at killer prices. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's Wayfair, WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So this is primarily, of course, Matt George talking. This is not anything that I've heard or anything like this. When I heard these comments and the fact that these comments are coming out from Peja right now, in the midst of all the smoke starting to build in a Trey Young trade, the timing is really, really convenient. Now again, Peja does not work for the front office anymore, but of course, he is very connected to the front office. Now, he also did not simply appear on this podcast in order to spread Kings propaganda or anything like that. He was asked about his thoughts on the De'Aaron Fox situation. But I do think there's a little convenience and there's a little bit of saving face going on, and dare I say posturing happening. It could be two separate circumstances that are just happening at the same time. But I tend to believe that conveniences and like that stuff doesn't happen super often, especially with how connected people are in the NBA today. The Trey Young trade rumors are really heating up, right? Like this is real. This is not just a, hey, fun, hypothetical conversation that we can have on Locked On Kings while we're trying to kill time during the summer. No, the Trey Young conversation is very, very real. So much so that I've heard, multiple people have heard, that the framework of the deal is there. It's not done, nothing's agreed upon, but there's an understanding of if this trade were to happen, here's what it would look like. Conversations have happened between Scott Perry's front office and the Atlanta Hawks front office about a potential Trey Young trade. Now, that doesn't have to mean anything. Frameworks of deals can happen all the time and don't amount to anything, right? The Kings could have a framework of a deal for LaMelo Ball, and a framework of a deal could simply be what I do here on Locked On Kings. You call the Locked On Hornets host and you say, what about Zach LaVine and this pick and that pick and this money for that money for this guy? And they say, yeah, that could work. Okay, there's a framework of a deal there. It doesn't mean that either side's going to jump to it and say yes. My point is, we're not super close to a Trey Young trade happening or anything like that, but it's real. It's legitimate. Conversations are happening, and there's at least an understanding of how that deal would get done between these two teams. It is not just, for lack of a better term, podcast hosts blowing smoke. James Ham from ESPN 1320, The Insiders, also of the Kings Beat, talked about hesitations are on the side of general manager Scott Perry, which I think is very, very interesting. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But all of these rumors are heating up. Zach LaVine's money works in a star swap trade for Trey. Now, I don't think the Hawks would ever do just Trey Young for Zach LaVine straight up. I think the Kings will have to include probably some significant draft compensation in that trade in order to get Trey here to Sacramento. But suddenly there's a narrative that is being out there and being pushed and being floated by Peja Stojakovic that LaVine was forced upon the Sacramento Kings, or the Kings had no choice in the Fox trade but to trade for Zach LaVine. Dare I say, in an attempt to save face before potentially trading Zach LaVine in a deal to make themselves look a little bit better for the De'Aaron Fox trade in the first place? Again, it could just be me following an unnecessary breadcrumb trail. But, I mean, it's convenient, isn't it? It's convenient that Zach LaVine could potentially be on the move all of a sudden this summer, and the Kings organization is now like, hey, like, we traded De'Aaron Fox away for a guy that we had here for only a handful of months, and then we realized, whoopsie, and then we traded him away for somebody else that has a big risk attached to him. Yeah, if you can try and make things look a little bit better for you and clean up that narrative a little bit by putting the blame on somebody else or making it somebody else's fault, which has been kind of common with this Kings organization over the years. Like, hey, it's not us. I mean, it's like all the finger pointing and nonsense. I don't buy it. I don't think anybody really would buy it, but it sure is awful convenient. Sure is awful convenient. But again, in the case of the Trey Young trade, the conversations are real. The smoke is real. And like James Ham said, or at least what he's reporting, like the hesitation is on the side of Scott Perry, it sounds like, as of now. Music to my ears. I'll be honest with you. Music to my ears. Now, I want to go back to like a month ago. I think it was around a month ago, where I put out a podcast and I like kind of threw all caution to the wind, and it was a heart podcast, not a brain podcast. I'm talking about, hey, the idea of a Trey Young trade is kind of growing on me. The chaos of a Trey Young trade is kind of growing on me. There is still a part of me that's like, that would be really, really fun. Trey Young in Sacramento chucking threes, the pick and roll of Trey Young and Domantas Sabonis, the offensive firepower of that potential Kings team. I'm in from an entertainment standpoint. Acknowledging the drastic, massive risks attached to it. Scott Perry's hesitation for me says two things. Number one, Scott Perry is a good general manager because he is aware, just like he's even more aware than I or you or any of us in the media, that if you get this wrong, you're in big, big trouble. Like you're starting your era as the general manager with a massive, massive move that could completely dictate the remainder or the next 4 or 5 years of your era, and you might not even see those 4 or 5 years out because of the fallout from this move if you get it wrong. I think Scott Perry's aware of that. The hesitations that Scott Perry has with Zach LaVine, those hesitations about him being a winning basketball player, you could easily apply those same exact hesitations to Trey Young. But here's the big difference. If you were to trade Zach LaVine for Trey Young, while I don't think it makes perfect sense for the Atlanta Hawks unless you lump in a bunch of draft compensation on top of that, why would the Atlanta Hawks do that? Because the Hawks are hesitant to give Trey Young the massive contract extension. Both LaVine and Young are on very similar contract situations right now. That's why it makes sense that you would move LaVine as part of this deal. If you do that, not only do the Kings have to still deal with the short-term ramifications of paying out that high money contract, the Kings will more than likely have to begin negotiating a massive contract extension for Trey Young, potentially a maximum contract extension for Trey Young immediately. So now you're investing a lot of years and hundreds of millions of dollars into Trey Young, who is your new number one, your star in Sacramento, plus you've attached 2, 3, maybe more first-round picks to LaVine in order to get that deal done. You get where I'm going here. Massive, massive risk. Scott Perry's hesitation makes a ton of sense. I'm talking to people in Atlanta, talking to people in Sacramento, trying to find out as much as we can find out about this deal, but it's real. And the more we find out about it, the more I'll share with you here on Locked On Kings. This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Look, there is nothing like the NBA playoffs. They've been incredible, right? The intensity, the buzzer beaters, there have been so many this year. The fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere that you must experience live, and this year's matchups have delivered in a major way. Of course, it's NBA Finals time now, and if you want to get in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest of big games. Prices on the app actually drop the closer that you get to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Of course, you're not just looking at NBA Finals tickets, although I highly recommend you check Game Time first if you're planning on making a trip to OKC or Indiana to watch a game. But Game Time has incredible deals for baseball games, for football games this upcoming season, concerts, local theatrical productions, comedy shows, whatever it may be, you can find tickets on Game Time. Your seat views are going to be better than you will find anywhere else, like as accurate as they possibly come. And with the Game Time guarantee, you know that you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section on another site, they will credit you 110% of the difference. Plus, the NFL schedule release just dropped, and if you are looking at your calendar trying to plan out some weekends in Las Vegas to watch the Raiders, or going down to Santa Clara to watch the 49ers, or traveling elsewhere just to watch some team in the NFL this year, you'll find amazing seats on Game Time, and that Game Time guarantee will save you a lot of money. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I really want to hear from you. You might be mad at me about the things that I said about Peja's comments and Rich Paul, and you might say, Matt, you're defending De'Aaron Fox again. No, not really. I'm just telling you what the reality of the situation is. The Kings screwed up. And I understand them trying to lessen the blow or save face a little bit, but I ain't buying it. I'm not. I've seen and been around this organization far too much to buy into that. So, hey, that's just me, but I want to hear from you. If you don't have to let me influence your opinions. Like, you can feel the way you feel, and we can talk about it. Let's have a discourse about it. Hit me up on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. I want to hear your thoughts on the Trey Young trade too, right? Of course, we've talked about this before, but it's legit, right? Like, if that is the move the Kings make, that is a humongous swing. Humongous swing. Give us plenty to talk about here on Locked On Kings. Would make the Sacramento Kings awful intriguing, if you ask me. And hey, I've been asking for the Kings to make me care again this upcoming season. That would do it. Just don't know if it's the safest of moves to make. But I've also said on this podcast, too, that the Kings can't really get to where they're trying to go by being safe. I mean, think about the Chris Webber trade, right? I know we bring this up a lot. Oh, man, everything that has to do with the early 2000s, late 90s. Yeah, you traded Mitch Richmond away for Chris Webber, who didn't want to be here, and it was a humongous risk. It worked. Maybe Trey Young would too. Hit me up with your thoughts on a Trey Young trade. I also wanted to bring to your attention, because I'm really excited about this, on Father's Day, which happy upcoming Father's Day to all you fathers out there, ESPN is dropping an E60 documentary about former Sacramento Kings center Scott Pollard. He went through an incredible medical battle where he had to receive a heart transplant. The guy should have died. It was a tremendous battle he went through. And everything was successful. He's still with us. And they did a documentary following his entire story. The documentary also features Bobby Jackson, current Kings or new Kings assistant coach, and of course, former Kings Sixth Man of the Year, Scott Pollard's teammate, and features Kings legendary broadcaster Gary Gerould. I am so excited about this documentary. I cannot wait to watch it. I mean, if you remember Scott, right, with the hairstyles and just the player that he was, right, he's just such this massive personality as well as just a massive human being. I've had the opportunity to meet Scott a couple of times. It's been nothing but fantastic for me. Also got to live out a dream of mine of being on Survivor, which is really, really cool. I'm very excited about this story. I think it's going to be a really powerful story. If you want to watch the preview or the trailer that ESPN put out there, they sent it to me, and I tweeted it out on my social media account. So again, at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter or X, you can scroll down a little bit and you will find the trailer that I put out a couple of days ago. It looks really, really good. I can't wait for it. So I encourage you to go and check that out and watch that, because that'll also help us kill some of the time here this summer. Tomorrow on Locked On Kings, while of course all this Trey Young conversation is happening over here, Darius Garland is also a potential target for the Sacramento Kings. There have been rumors and reports that the Kings are interested in Garland. Makes a ton of sense. So let's talk to the Locked On Cavaliers podcast about it. Locked On Cavs joins me tomorrow to talk about a Darius Garland trade, how available he would be, and what it would potentially take from Sacramento to bring Darius Garland here to the capital city. So we'll chat about that. I hope you join me on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.